Good morning, everybody, and welcome back. So, if you're tuning into today's show, we are, of course, going to cover the new Matrix film called Resurrection. Now, before we get into that film, there's been some breaking news. Breaking news on the case with Griswold. Let me pull that up once we make sure we're connected here. And I'm actually glad to announce that I was wrong about this one. Did not think that they were going to convict this woman, but understand that we still have yet to see a real photo of this woman in chains. And so you have to ask yourself, what's really going on here? This could all just be a show, but let's assume that she did get convicted and this is all true. Well, of course, this will open up, or has a potential to open up, Pandora's box, because I don't know anybody in their right mind that would sit in jail knowing that all these other people were connected to this. I mean, this was part of her defense, wasn't it? Her defense was, I was just, an unwilling participant, and that, why are you guys coming after me when there's all these hundreds of other people that you could go after? Well, now they've now forced her hand because they're threatening her with jail time, right? 65 years. So they're thinking that she's either going to cooperate with investigators and start naming names or appeal the decision. Either way, she's going to face decades in prison. So the question is, whose names will she start giving up? Right? Now, let's look at some of the highlights here, because there are a lot of people that were in this circle. It went all the way up to the top, to presidents, to people that would not be president yet, that would be president later, and all these other things. So she was found guilty of 5 charges. If you hadn't heard the news yet, she only got off on 1 of the charges, but that was okay, because she's still going to face 65 years in prison. The verdict came nearly a year and a half after she was arrested. She has 2 options. She can fight and take it up on appeal, or she will likely face a 65-year sentence, or she can start issuing some names of who else was involved for a substantially lighter sentence. So I guess we're going to see what happens here. I expect either chaos to just break loose here, or this to all just go away, or she could mysteriously end up dead. So let's get into this Matrix Revolutions movie. And I put together some clips for you guys. We're going to look at the clips, and then we're going to have a discussion about Matrix Revolutions. Welcome, everybody.
Okay, so come with me. You have to be ready to leave. You have to be really ready. And if you're not, if you think that this is where you belong, the choice is an illusion. You already know what you have to do.
So the choice is an illusion. They're finally starting to admit it, right? That this whole right-left paradigm, it's all just an illusion. Now, people will still go and see movies like this and still not get it. They'll be like, oh, I'm voting for this person, I'm voting for that person. It's all just to keep you busy and keep you consenting to their evil. Keep you in the Matrix. Now, what is the Matrix? What is it really? We're going to talk about that today, because I believe the Matrix is the invisible tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And that's where these people exist, in the Matrix world, in these pods that look like tree trunks. Now let's keep going with this.
I've been setting productivity records every year since I took over. And the best part, zero resistance. People stay in their pods. Turns out in my matrix, the worse we treat you, the more we manipulate you, the more energy you produce. It's nuts.
So, this is the termination of the two trees, or the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and it all boils down to Neo and Trinity. They become the center of the entire Matrix. The One. So, what the Matrix really is, this invisible tree of good and evil, the one that we've been locked in since the garden, and it's depicted in the film as this terminal where Neo and Trinity lay asleep in their pod. They become the Adam and Eve of the Matrix. Why? Because they are the most powerful source of struggle, of passion, of love, and of conflict. You see, the entire Matrix feeds off of this duality. And it all terminates here in the Matrix world. And that brings us to the electric reality. And this is how our reality works. It's cause and effect. It's sin and the results of sin, trickling and magnifying infinitely, and always ending up in death. These are choices that we make because we're in the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. There he jumps from Neo's empty pod to Trinity's pod as they try to free her from the Matrix. Now here's where we get into the magnetic universe. Here you see Neo repelling bullets. Now I'm going to explain to you what all this means, because it's pretty fascinating. So in the film, Neo is put back to sleep in the Matrix, and he has to be woken up again. And once awake, he frees Trinity from her sleep, realizing that they are both the key to reshaping the Matrix in their image. So they realize that they're the source of the Matrix, their pain, their suffering, and their entire lives are one big manipulation, so that the Matrix can feed off of that energy. And they're kept near each other, but separated, to create an energy field of sorts, I guess you could call it. So Neo is repelling these bullets. How does he do it? Well, a few years ago, we figured this out. Neo is a neodymium magnet. Now, these magnets interact with copper. I'm going to show you some clips from this video here of how neodymium magnets interact with copper. This is fascinating stuff here.
Price. In this video, I will be exploring magnetic braking and levitation utilizing the inductance of large copper plates, strong neodymium magnets. Together they behave in strange ways. Copper is not magnetic, so they don't exactly attract each other, but at the same time this magnet doesn't seem to want to slip off very quickly. It drags across the plate slowly, like it's moving through a thick fluid.
Now, this is pretty amazing stuff, right? How these neodymium magnets interact with copper. Because in the movie, copper is slang for like a human. Copper top battery is a human that they can draw energy off of. They're called copper tops in the movie because they're like batteries. Well, Neo and copper have a strange anti-gravitic relationship. They repel each other. Now, according to this video, science tells us this is all about currents. eddy currents. But I think everyone would agree that this looks very supernatural, doesn't it? Watch.
It's even more interesting if I drop the magnet on the plate. It slows down mid-air and gently floats to the surface. So if the copper is not magnetic, something else must be causing this. And many of you probably already know the answer has to do with electricity. When a magnetic field moves through copper and many other metals, it causes electrons to reorganize themselves and flow in a circular pattern perpendicular to the oncoming magnetic field. Of course, the electrons were perfectly happy being where they were before the magnet tried moving them around, and so they resist this movement by generating a temporary magnetic field of their own. There's no attraction or repulsion, just resistance to change. One way that we can prove this resistance is due to the flow of electricity is by replacing the copper plates with a copper coil. This coil of wire is not connected at the ends, and so it does not form a complete electrical circuit.
Notice the coil of copper. And remember, Neo would repel these bullets. He could pull energy from him. Now, this coiling is called reeving. It's when something is coiled around. You know, like Keanu Reeves, Christopher Reeves, Elon Reeves Musk, and Paul Revere, America's first coppersmith. There's a whole lot more to the copper electric universe than meets the eye. And this reeve is a portal from which energy can be made from nothing. The basis of the modern electric generator, magnets and copper.
If we tried to make electrons flow around this coil, they would have nowhere to go, and we can tell this is the case because when I drop a magnet through the center, there is no resistance. It falls through the coil as if it were not even there, no slowing down at all. Nothing to do with electricity. When I do connect the two ends of the copper wire, now the magnet pauses as soon as it reaches the coil, and it takes a moment to make it all the way through. Electrons can now make a complete orbit around the coil in response to the oncoming magnetic field. Circuit with an LED, we can see a better indication of the electricity. The LED is very efficient, so powering it doesn't slow down the magnet quite as much as when the circuit was closed directly. This is a simplified model of how the majority of the world's electricity is generated. Different ways to more efficiently move magnets through coils of wire. Now back to the copper plates, we can't so easily get electricity from these like we can from a coil, but the electrons are still flowing and cause very heavy resistance to a strong magnet. Because of this, we can do some interesting things like manually levitate a magnet above the surface. I'm doing this by holding a second magnet underneath the plate. It's not easy to make a magnet float in this way, but it is fun to practice. I found that using a very wide magnet on top and a smaller magnet underneath is the most controllable setup. I made a small stand to hold my copper plates out of wood and acrylic glass. The only reason this levitation is possible. On a surface without this property, a magnet will fly right off the side, distance that we've seen to change by how I'm able to rotate this small cube magnet from a long distance away, even with the copper plate separating the magnet in my hand. Replacing the disc magnet with this smaller cube in the earlier setup allows me to walk it across the surface like a little robot, and the motion damping provided by the copper gives me very precise control. Besides the generation of electricity, there are a few other practical applications for this sort of motion damping. High-speed trains and even some roller coasters use a magnetic braking system set up in a way very similar to this, with powerful magnets, usually electromagnets, elevated above a conductive surface. The magnets slow the vehicle down quickly without any surface-to-surface friction that causes damage in conventional braking systems between brake pads and rotors. My favorite tabletop demonstration of magnetic braking is to swing a magnet toward a chunk of copper like a wrecking ball. The magnet loses all of its momentum at the very last moment in a way that almost looks supernatural. It reminds me of a scene in the second Matrix movie where Neo stops bullets in midair.
And he just said it. This is exactly what they were depicting. Neo is the neodymium magnet. And now we're going to get into copper because there's so much more to this story, okay? Or they're just scratching the surface in that video there. This is the alchemical symbol for copper, as you can see here. And I believe that Tesla knew about the alchemy of making energy from nothing using magnets. After all, he was the father of like the generator, wasn't he? Because look at this. This is the floor plan from the Wyndham New Yorker Hotel where Tesla died on the 33rd floor. And it looks a lot like the alchemical symbol for copper, does it not? Wow. So, Neo deflects bullets with magnetics by redirecting energy through his Reeves and slowing time. He also walks in and out of portals. There are several scenes in the beginning of the film where there are these portals. They talk about going through portals. Now, elevators and phone booths have lots of this reeving, this stuff right here, these reeving splices. And this is probably why they use elevators and telephone booths, you know, in these films as portals. Elevators have reeved cables, and phone booths have reeved copper phone lines. And they're full of copper money, of course. Now, what is copper money and what does it represent? Well, copper money is basically the nested source of power and energy within the matrix. It's what controls everybody. The copper controls everybody. Just like how it interacts with Neo. This is what controls the copper top batteries, humanity. It's what keeps men asleep. Now, an interesting phenomenon has happened over the last couple hundred years in terms of coinage and money. As you can see here, in this historical timeline of the actual physical makeup of money, in the beginning, money was mostly made out of like nickel with a little bit of copper. But look at what's at the top. What is at the top? Copper was at the top. The penny was 100% copper back in 1783. The copper top. Control of humanity. We are batteries. Coins represent all of the fruits of your labor. But over the years, an inversion occurred. We went from copper at the top and mostly nickel, and actually silver is the way the coins started out. I'm sorry. Silver. And that has since been replaced. And now, at the top, pennies are mostly zinc with very little copper in them. They're only copper coated, 2%. So, coins went from almost all silver to almost all copper. Look at the dime, mostly copper. Look at the quarter, mostly copper. They're copper inside in their cores. So, everything has shifted over to copper. Now, why do you think that is? Copper isn't necessarily cheap. Why would all the coins be filled with copper? From the penny which was, the lowest denomination being the only solid copper coin, to now all the coins being full of copper. Well, I believe all this has to do with the electric universe. Here's another great diagram that gives you an idea of how these coins are put together. This is the modern formula for coins. 75% copper is the nickel. 91% copper is the dime. And 91% copper is the quarter. The rest is made of nickel. Silver's gone. So we truly live in a copper electric universe. So, copper-based money is what we have now, right under our noses, encapsulating all of our energy and labor, just like in the Matrix. We are the copper top batteries. Now, this is Keanu Reeves' motorcycle company. And what is clearly being depicted here is the profile of a man with a bike helmet on. Let's zoom this up so you can see this. You see this edge is flat here? That's a bike helmet because it's a motorcycle company. And in his chest is a Reeving serpent. The serpent in the chest. Arches and portals. Now, in the Matrix films, there was a city called Zion. I think it's destroyed or something. And then there's a new city called Io. Now, what does Io mean? Well, of course, it's a moon. But it goes deeper because Io represents the ones and zeros, the on and the off position that makes up the digital space. All digital information is made up of ones and zeros, an on or off switch, electricity on, electricity off. And that is everything that you see on a screen. It's nothing more than ones and zeros. It's all an illusion. Now, there's also an I and an O on Saturn. The ring that's around the outside edge of Saturn is the O, and there's a storm at the south pole of Saturn that looks like an I. Now let's move on to other topics regarding this because there's more. Now, many of you know my take on the black goo. The black goo made an appearance in the film. I believe it represents serpent DNA. The same kind of stuff that was preserved in canopic jars in ancient Egypt so that the pharaohs could be reborn, reanimated. Programmable matter of the serpent bloodline. And they will try to mix that with the watery clay to make a new race. And in the film, it actually consumes Neo. I didn't put a clip in here, but it actually begins to consume him in the film. Now, the film also has lots of imagery about the nested reality, which we've talked a lot about. The true reality is a prison inside a womb pod. And everyone's trapped in these trees. Let's go back to that slide so you guys can see that. It's here. Here it is. So they're all trapped in these trees. They're like fruit. The fruit in the trees. Harvested at will. Asleep. Okay. Born into bondage. The amniotic fluid in these pods. And in fact, the biblical translation of womb is matrix. And I firmly believe that this is where they got the idea for the name matrix. As you can see here, the womb is called the matrix right out of the Bible. So everyone's born into the hive prison. There's lots of references to bees and moths and butterflies and buzzing things. You know, everything is really just metaphors for a hive. And you're born and then you forget. Now, what do bees do? Well, bees work. They work without question. What do they work for? They work for the honey. What is the honey? Honey is the money. Because that's all we know, right? We're born into this reality. We don't remember anything. We're told this is what we're supposed to do. And most people just continue to do it. And most people don't even realize that the entire matrix would fall apart if we simply stopped working. So there's a spaceship in the film, and the name of the ship is called Nemo Sign. Let's pull it up here. I wonder if they have an actual picture of it here. Nemo Sign. Now, the old ship was called Nebuchadnezzar in the previous Matrix films. New ship is called Nemo Sign. Now, what is Nemo Sign? I wanted to break that down for you. Well, Nemo Sign is actually the Greek goddess of memory. Here she is right here. Nemo Sign. And it's interesting because according to the myth surrounding this Greek goddess, memory is stored in water. In fact, the words amnesia and amniotic fluid are closely related. Nemo Sign. Now, of course, I didn't hit all the points of the film. It's kind of a convoluted film. There wasn't a lot of new information in the film. So you're probably asking yourself, how do you escape the Matrix? Well, you stop choosing. You choose the middle. You choose the middle. Here's a cross-section in the back of the brain. And within it, you can see the image of Christ tucked away underneath the flesh. Now, I'm not talking the fake Christ. You choose Christ, the real Christ, not the fake Christ taught to us by religion that still somehow justifies war, where the temples are all still full of serpent money, and they are bought and paid for to do the will of governments. The real Jesus would have never approved of all that. Can you see Jesus here in the flesh at the back of the neck? This cutaway image. Now, why would Jesus' image be imprinted upon our flesh? As a reminder that he never left us. He's imprinted himself on our soul. That tingling feeling in the back of your neck. That he's always with you. All you have to do is acknowledge him. And choose him. And step out of the matrix. Go through the exit door. And the matrix loses all of its power. So those are my thoughts on the Matrix film and the way out of the Matrix. Choosing the middle, the real Jesus between the two thieves. Let's go into the chat here. If there's any other aspects of the film that you guys want to talk about, we can do that right now. I'm sure I didn't hit all the points, but those are the points that stuck out to me. Okay. Can you draw him on the brain? Sure. See if we can figure that out here. Okay. All right, let's outline him in yellow here. Okay, you guys ready? Now, this is the pineal body. Oops. Get our pen out here. This is the pineal body, which forms the head. Then you have this structure here, which forms his, his chest. Okay. His chest. Goes to his waist area. There you see, he's basically on the cross here. Very clear. There he is right there. And you can see his legs coming down here. There you go. With his arms outstretched. This image is a little more obscure, but you can see him tucked away, all of the same, because they hadn't cut away everything. Now, this portion right here at the lap, or in the front section, in front of Jesus, is called the cerebellum. This is also called the arbor vitae, which means the tree of life. So the tree of life surrounds Jesus in the brain. This whole structure right here, the cerebellum, the arbor vitae, the tree of life, surrounds Jesus. And that is the tree of life, isn't it? We give up the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. We give up the two hemispheres of the brain. We come down here into the arbor vitae at the feet of Jesus. Now, there are some very deep studies that we've done on this called the body code. And you can see all this with even finer detail. One of the most fascinating revelations, I think, that has ever been revealed to us. Now, there are some in the community that have a new age slant to them that have basically tried to say that Jesus was simply an archetype that was created out of early studies of a cross-section of the brain, and that he's not real. I don't know how anybody in their right mind could believe that. That is a person's profile in the flesh. To believe that, that represents an archetype and this was all made up, it's simply dishonest. Because it looks like a person. If it looked like something else, I could say, okay, that looks like something else, and maybe that was an archetype that was used. But no, this is a person. This is the Son of God. There's a lot of talk about flesh, isn't there, in the Bible? Lots of talk about flesh. And Jesus coming in the flesh. Why do you think that is? It's a reminder. There's a lot of talk about being created in his image. The whole image thing, right? So these words, I believe, are meant to be breadcrumbs or clues that one day when knowledge increased in the last days, that we could all look into the flesh, look into the image, and see the image of God in our flesh. And I think that's what we found. So, that's not actually him there, although he resides in us. I believe the pineal is how he enters in through us. It's like an antenna. Okay, you're filled with the Holy Spirit. It probably comes through this pineal body, center of your brain. which forms his head in the image here. So, written on the flesh. Okay, I'm back in the chat. I am, yes. Now, for those of you that are new to the channel and to the body code series and everything, and how we had covered this, imagine too that when you look at this image here, what goes through the top of this is the optic nerves. It actually crosses very close to the pineal gland, which is right under here. Okay. And the crossing optic nerves connect to two eyes, which I think represents the two thieves on the cross. Remember, Jesus was in the middle, just like in the anatomy of the brain here, and to his right and to his left were the thieves. Right? All right. Yes, yes, absolutely, Rebecca. Christ is trampling the serpent. You get it now? What does Rebecca mean? Well, what is he standing on top of? The spine, the serpent, the spinal cord, the snake, the kundalini. This is where he's standing. The seed of the woman. Christ. The serpent will bruise him in the heel. Right? And that's exactly where he's standing. The serpent bruising him in the foot, in the heel. And Christ bruising the serpent in the head. It's all there, you guys. It's all there. Now, of course, the Bible was written long before these detailed images of the anatomy were drawn or looked at or talked about or even close to understood. Nobody understood even what they were looking at. These would require detailed cross sections with very sharp surgical instruments that just did not exist back then to do dissections and all of this. Okay. So unless you're a historian that likes to rewrite history and assume that the ancient Egyptians were very, very far advanced medically, which they weren't because they got sick and died. They didn't have medical technology back then to survive certain things. Okay, things wiped them out. So you can't have both. You can't say, oh, they were very, medically advanced, but then they got wiped out and died. That doesn't jive. You have to accept that, yeah, they had some basic knowledge, but they didn't have advanced knowledge. So the only other explanation is supernatural. It's that God created our flesh to encode the history of the world, much of the Bible, the coming of his son. He is the creator. And what better way to do it? What better way to prove that you are the one and only true God than to actually imprint it on our flesh? Yep, Arthur, 33 vertebrae, which encases the serpent, doesn't it? Cases the spinal cord. So, now the entire human body is a map of the process that we go through to free ourselves from the serpent, right? Your lower base desires. Let's go back to the image here. Your lower base desires entering into the spirit with Jesus. We usually start our lives out in this lower portion in the spine with sensation and feeling and, physical, the focus on physical strength. And then as we go through life, we go upwards. I'm not talking Kundalini, that's the false worship. Okay, we go upwards towards Christ. And what he does is he helps us realize that it's not about the physical, that it's about the spiritual. Because you can't take the physical into communion with him. We can only get there through the spiritual, right? So, all this is spiritual symbolism implanted right on our flesh. Now, the enemy wants you down here in the spine still. He wants you to deny Christ. He wants you to stop right here. Okay? He wants you to deny Christ ever exists. He wants to cut this part out of the brain. Don't acknowledge it. How do I know? Because when you talk to New Age people, they don't mention Christ anywhere. There is no Christ. It's all about Kundalini and crown chakras and all this stuff, which is that's not of Christ. They counterfeit, basically. They glorify the serpent, which is the pathway, the spine, instead of Christ. Well, Christ has already conquered the serpent. That's why he's on top here. Okay. He's already bruised the serpent in the head with his foot. So, all right. Now, everything that's mentioned in the Bible really happened, of course. Okay, so this isn't about discrediting what happened in the Bible, and it wasn't just symbolism. It actually really happened. That's the amazing thing about God, is that he knew the beginning from the end. He knew the Alpha from the Omega, and that's how he knew what our flesh, how to make our flesh in the image of God, in the image of the history of the world, in the image of the plan of salvation, also in the image of the enemy, because sin entered, right? So you see the enemy also. See the whole cast represented in the flesh. So, all right. Okay, you guys, I love you. I'm glad you guys all showed up today. We'll be back here tomorrow. I have a pre-recorded show tomorrow. It'll be the last and final part of the 2020 hindsight to the present. Just all of the stuff that we worked on over the last couple years. It's the final part, and I pre-recorded a show. It's about 20 minutes long, so we'll be back on here tomorrow at this same time with that final part. And so I will see you guys all then. I love each and every one of you. Have a great day, you guys. Take care and be safe.